No retro fans. Today I'm going to talk about something, well, not completely unrelated to retro, because it is already retro gaming, so to say, but it's a bit unrelated to 8-bit gaming or 8-bit, well, whatsoever I'm doing on this channel nowadays. And because I was searching for something related to, well, retro stuff in my boxes, and I kind of stumbled over a stack of CD-ROMs, and one of these CD-ROMs was, or still is, Grand Prix Circuit, Grand Prix 2. It's not Grand Prix Circuit. I'm kind of mixing up those two games. Um, and I have, or I had, very good memories of this game, but I could remember that it was always a challenge to get this game running on the PC hardware I was owning in 1996 as the game was released. And I mean, it's this typical PC gaming problem that new games are released and you go and you are really excited and you go and buy the game, and then there's total disappointment because the game isn't running on your hardware. And so most of the time you really are in a kind of trapped in the loop of getting a new game, upgrading your PC, being happy for a moment, and then getting the next game, and then you really have to upgrade your PC again. So that's probably one thing of 8-bit gaming, or let's say 8-bit, 16-bit console, computer, whatsoever gaming, that the stuff you get for those devices like a C64 or Sinclair or an NES or something like this, it is supposed to run on this hardware and it is going to run on this hardware. But PC gaming is a little bit different, and especially at the early age of PC gaming, where you had, for example, no sound cards or something like this, or graphic cards with not enough memory or something like this, it is always a little bit tricky to find the right, let's say, combination to run the games you prefer. And I can really remember that when I got my first version of Lemmings, for example, I was so astonished by the music that I was really keen on getting a good sound card just to listen to this fantastic game soundtrack. And that was actually my first, well, experience in MIDI-based, MIDI-generated music, something like this. But coming back to GB2, I remember that I have played GB1 quite a lot, and I think it was a disc release, a floppy disk release, because I can't find the CD-ROM anymore. So I assume that in some of my boxes there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, 3.5-inch discs containing the game. And I was really keen, and I was so excited about racing Formula One cars that I started to build my own setup and started to build my steering wheel, because back then there wasn't hardware something like this available. So I started to tingle with potentiometers and an old flight. It's not a stick. It's I don't know, how do you call this? It's some sort of a wheel, but it's not really a wheel. So I started to modify this, and I started to create my own pedals so that I really have this race car feeling. And yeah, actually, I spent a couple of hours, many hours on this topic, and I was really drawn into this whole topic that I almost screw up my apprenticeship exams by this, because my mind was just about racing and car setups and tracks and improving my driving and all that things, that I had a very hard time to stay focused during my exams. And fortunately, I went through this quite okay, but well, here you can see it is really kind of addictive. And when I was reading those early game magazines, and I saw the first screenshots and the first advertisements of GB2, I was hooked. I was really keen on getting this game. And as soon as it was available, I went to the shop and I spent, I think it was 70, 80 Deutschmark, D-Mark, DM back then. And it was a huge amount of money for me. And I went back. I was so excited, and I installed the game, and then total disappointment. My PC wasn't not even close to handle the game as I have seen it in the magazine. So I really had to degrade all the settings to a minimum just to get it barely running on my PC. And I can remember that I was really upset. I was really so upset about this. And I was complaining about nitty-gritty details like the sun reflection on the car and the texture stuff and all that things. So I was really, I had the opinion that it is about simulation, it's about driving, it's not that much about graphics. And yeah, but well, it is the way it is. Everything is going to get better. And I think I upgraded my PC at a certain point in time then, and was probably able to run the game quite okay. But by then, I think I kind of lost the interest in Formula One and driving Formula One games on the PC, because it started the age of 3D accelerated graphic cards. And so I went more into this topic, and this was the time of IndyCar Racing 2 and NASCAR Racing 2. And later on the GTR series. So Formula cars weren't that much of my interest anymore. But well, as I said, as I went through the boxes, I found the CD and I thought, well, you really have to give this game another chance and to see how it looks in full glory. And with the PC available right now and with DOSBox gaming, it shouldn't be so hard. That was what I found. And before we go into the details, let's jump quickly to the intro and then let's dive into GB2. And as promised, let's jump into GB2 right now. As you can see, the game is running in the background, and I have installed a different camera for this video just to see, or just to show how I have set up that whole thing. So today you're seeing the other side of my working desk. So on the right hand side there is my tinkering 8-bit whatsoever part, and this is actually my working PC, which I use for home office and all the stuff I'm doing, like video recording, video editing. And GB2 is actually running in window mode, but I can set this to full screen, obviously, for the gaming experience. And you can see here I got my Logitech G27 steering wheel with the pedals just under my desk. And this is actually my, let's say, racing configuration. And what you can see here right now is as well, just switch to cockpit mode, that I have added a small timer into the cockpit, because I had a lot of troubles getting GB2 running on an exact timing. So actually, it's not so difficult to get the game running with all details and smooth experience and all that stuff. But it was really a little bit tricky to get it running with exact timing. And I had actually two situations. So the game was running quite fine, but way too fast. And with way too fast, I really mean about 20% too fast or something like this. Or I was configuring DOSBox in a way that the game was actually running on a quite exact timing, but then I had a lot of problems with sound stutter, and especially the settings I found was working. They were working on one track, but not on another. So this was a situation that wasn't really making me happy. And I posted a couple of short clips on Twitter. And interestingly, we got some sort of a conversation there. I got some comments, I got some feedback. And one guy called with the name of Rawiioli, I hope the pronunciation is almost close to the real thing, suggested a YouTube channel run by Ted Mead. And he is heavily into retro racing. And he has created a small, not very comprehensive video about how to set up GB2 in DOSBox. And the main learning I had from this is that I was actually using the wrong version of DOSBox. While searching the internet for this stutter issue and all that things, I already discovered that there are kind of branches or something like this, different versions of DOSBox. But I thought, well, I don't want to get lost in the DOSBox thing at all. So perhaps there is a chance to get this running with the normal DOSBox, but well, no, I was wrong. And Ted Mead has suggested to use a different version. And I'm going to show you this right now, make things a little bit easier. And this is called the Enhanced Community Edition. So ECE in short. And this is actually based on the DOSBox development forum discussions, and they added a lot of improvements to the original DOSBox. And one thing that isn't mentioned here is some sort they got the timing right. And or let's say they got the timing almost right. So by further testing the game and the timing, I just found that the lap times in the game shown compared to real world timing. So I'm not talking about real world racetracks. I just took my stopwatch and checked the lap times. So actually the game is about 2 to 3 seconds off of the real world timing. Sometimes it's a little bit faster, sometimes it's kind of lagging behind, but it is, I think, actually acceptable if we talk about lap times ranging, let's say, about 90 seconds or something like this, and you are off by 1 or 2 seconds, then that's totally fine to me. So I'm not going to go into online competitive racing where this may play a role, but for me, for my own pleasure, everything is working quite fine. So, and getting through this wasn't as easy as it sounds right now. So I had to do a couple of other things as well. So let's see whether I can find the right window. Here it is. And DOSBox is actually configured by a text file. So I have opened this here and I go briefly through the most important settings here. So the first thing is your screen setup. So this is totally depending on what you are running. I have set the Windows resolution to 1080p, so full HD, just for the purpose of capturing. And I had to set the output to OpenGL, otherwise OBS wasn't seeing the content of DOSBox. And I think the other things are more or less default settings, except for priority. I set this to higher if DOSBox hasn't the focus. Otherwise, the game started to stutter a little bit when I went out of the DOSBox window. And for the sake of just controlling other things, it is more comfortable to set this to higher. And the next thing is actually your graphic card. And GB2 is able to run in VGA or SVGA mode. And since we want to get the most out of it, I have set this to SVGA mode. So that was one important thing. And then here you just define the scaler. And this is just for the, I think for the Windows resolution. And if you run this in full screen mode, then it is the original resolution of the game. And I haven't used any additional shaders or something like this. I'm quite fine how it looks right now. And then the next thing is the CPU. I had a lot of troubles with the original DOSBox, as mentioned before. So I had to test a couple of things in the original DOSBox. And just have to find the right section. Yeah, here we go. So setting the original DOSBox to auto or to dynamic was creating the problem of the game running too fast, and setting the core to normal or symbol requires that you fine-tune your cycles and your CPU type in order to get the game running. But as I said, this was heavily depending on the track, so this approach isn't working at all. But in DOSBox ECE, you just set this to auto and everything is running fine. So I haven't changed anything here. So, and the next thing is basically about your sound configuration. So we don't want to have no sound, so we set this to false. And I've set the sample rate to 48K because this is where my whole setup is configured, and this is not causing any aliasing effects or something like this. So that's actually quite fine. So it is perhaps a little bit noisy just around me because it is very stormy here in the area, and my windows blinds are shattering a lot, and I'm not sure whether this is recognizable in the audio. So, and the next thing is we want to use the Sound Blaster 16 because Grand Prix Circuit Grand Prix 2. I'm really sorry, is providing stereo sound, and in racing games, stereo sound is very, very highly recommendable because the sound is really awesome in GB2. So especially if you play this with headphones, for example, the Vector Finest headphones, then you really can distinguish which wheel is start to lock up, and you can really hear where your opponents are on the racetrack. So the sound is really amazing, and I highly recommend to run this in stereo mode. And I think back in the days I haven't had a stereo sound card. So my very first sound card was a mono sound card, and it was just later that I went to Sound Blaster compatible sound cards until I was able to afford the holy grail of sound cards, the AWE 32 Sound Blaster card, and later I was able to get the Gravis Ultra sound card as well. But well, as I said, SB16 is totally fine. Just have to remember the settings so that you can use them in the setup of the game. Then joystick. control inputs are really essential for the game. You can play it with keys, but I highly recommend using at least a joystick or something like this. And here I really had to experiment quite a lot, because with the initial settings, GB2 wasn't able to detect my steering wheel axis and knobs. So I really had to tinker a little bit with this, and what I found is that joystick type 4-axis works quite fine. And what I had to use was button wrap as well. Otherwise, I couldn't assign my shifting pedals to the shifting options in the game. As we're going to see later, it is almost nothing to configure inside the game. You really have to adapt your environment to the game. And I had to use button wrap, otherwise the game wasn't seeing any buttons at all. I mean, if we just take into consideration that the G27, as we can see it in the setup here right now, usually contains a shifter unit as well. And with this, I think in total you have about, let me guess, 8, 12, 16 buttons or something like this. And the shifter itself is an analog joystick, and you end up with 6 axes and all that thing. So it's really it's becoming a bit messy. But I'm running this without the shifter unit because for Formula 1 cars I prefer shifting pedals, and I like to keep my setup simple, so to say. So coming back to the configuration, as I said, button wrap was important for my setup. And at the end, I have set that zone to 0. It is the 4x10 because this creates some kind of a jumpy experience. If you steer out of the middle, then the car suddenly starts to steer or to turn. And I had to set this to 0, and then everything was going to be fine. And there was one thing, time it. Time it is set to true as default value, and I had to set this to false, otherwise my joystick or my axis value started to jitter a lot inside GB2. So I had to set this to false, and then it is smooth like silk and it's running quite fine. And at the end you just set your mount points, where is your game, where is your CD-ROM. As I said, I'm running this from an original CD-ROM, so I have attached a small USB 3 CD-ROM file. I'm just a bit confused why the game isn't visible anymore. Shouldn't be like this. So OBS lost it. That's interesting. Capture specific windows, DOSBox. Well, it was there just a moment ago, and now it's gone. That's really strange. Weird. That's really weird. Try to restart. Here it is. So, okay, so the game is back again, but I was actually talking about my CD-ROM, and this is just a small USB 3 DVD, CD, ROM, whatsoever, burner thingy, you can get this pretty cheap on eBay or other sources. And yeah, as I was saying, you have to mount this. Wow. I just hope my house here is going to be stable. You have to mount this as CD-ROM. That's really important because the game is loading content from the CD, and it's not all copied to your hard disk because, well, back in the days, hard disk space was very precious and hard disks were small. So you got your content from the CD-ROM. And DOSBox is using MSCDX as the main CD-ROM driver program whatsoever. And this requires a real CD-ROM in order to work. You can create an image of your CD and you can mount the image as a CD, and then it's going to work as well. That's probably the way I'm going to go if I'm going to spend more time with this game. Actually, I'm not sure about this, but it's more time constraint. And because the CD drive I'm using here is pretty noisy, and when this really accelerates, then you think it is going to fly somewhere or something like this. So for just the simple sake of comfort, I may use an image. And the next thing that speaks for an image is that that was something I was really surprised about. It is a hard localized version. So GB2 I'm running here right now is the German version, and there is no option to change the language or something like this. They really delivered games which were completely localized, and maybe I'm going to look for an English version or something like this. Anyway, and then there is just some batch file stuff going on, switching to my games directory, switching to the GB2 directory, and starting actually GB2. So that's all on the DOSBox side. I want to explain, and that's actually the thing we have to take into consideration here. So let's go to the next thing I had to use is the old Logitech profiler or Wingman profiler, whatever it was called. And because this is creating some sort of bridge between kind of modern steering hardware and, let's say, older generation games. So if you are into games that are, let's say, a little bit older than 5 or 10 years or something like this, then they're usually having a hard time seeing your Logitech game controller, at least in its full glory. So you may missing some access, you may missing some buttons or something like this. And to limit the range of steering, for example, all those stuff is done in this profiler. And I have created a profile called DOSBox, where I have assigned my buttons to certain keys. As you can see, we have here a lot of, just have to switch to the app. It's actually not working because I'm in a different window. So let's talk about this first. Okay. So there are additional game settings you can, or specific game settings you can adjust. And if you disable special force feedback device settings, then the steering wheel has no resistance at all, and this feels a bit, well, strange. So I've set this to, well, standard settings and enabled the centering spring, set this to 24. So you have at 25, something like this. So you have at least some resistance while steering, but obviously you have no feedback because, well, back in the days, there was no force feedback available. This came, I think, with Windows 95, and some of the first games were Monster Truck Madness, for example. And yeah, anyway. And the next thing I have set is use special steering wheel settings. And Interestingly, my mouse cursor isn't visible. Anyway, and I've set this to about 360 degree. I was playing with 270 degrees, but I found that the car is a bit too nervous on straights. So I have increased this in a real Formula One car back in the time. The steering is a bit wider, so you have about, I think, 420, 460-ish degree of real turn. But for me, this becomes a bit too, let's say, well, challenging. So I think 360 degrees is totally fine. And then everything else remains the same. So we can close this, and now we are back into Profiler, and here's my mouse cursor again. Okay, so here you can go over the buttons and you can see the alignment. And I went through the manual, and I was picking the most important keys for my purpose. Actually, inside the car, there aren't so many different options. So there is nothing like brake balance settings or something like this. So that's actually this came for later racing games. But you have some, let's say, you got some assistance, for example, like best lines, like traction control, for example, which isn't a real traction control, it's just a real spinning control. And you can say that you want to enter the box. Whether this makes a difference or not, I have no idea. And you can escape, for example, or you cancel your race. And this is actually quite an important option, because if you do races and if you want to save hot laps, then you really have to stop the race just before it finished. Otherwise, your hot laps are gone. Cannot retrieve them anymore. So you need some escape key on either your keyboard or on your steering wheel. And then you are able to save your hot laps. And that's actually all I have set here. I think I got replay set here as one key as well. And the enter key just to confirm certain options. And one thing I was jumping over it, just have to go back to this, is now the Windows has jumped to something completely different. That's funny. And here we go. Use special steering wheel settings, report combined pedals. So if you want to have acceleration and braking on separate axes, means you can stay on the throttle, but you can apply it brake a little bit if you feel that you're going to exceed your cornering speed, for example. Then it is important that you check off this box here, and I'm going to explain how you're going to set this up in the game then later on. So that's one thing I forgot to talk about. So now we can go out of this. And yep, then simply just save the profile and assign DOSBox ECE as the related game. And anytime you're going to start DOSBox, then well, your profile will be loaded automatically. So I have briefly mentioned the manual, and I just not going to read through all of this, but that's something I highly recommend. The manual is really excellent. It is superb, so to say. And as you can see, it has about 150 pages in total. It has a lot of nice photos and pictures, and it explains the basic configuration of the game, the basic handling of the game, and then it goes into the nitty-gritty details, explains all the menus, graphic detail settings and all that stuff, and how to set up your car. And if you go to the end of the manual, you have descriptions of all the tracks. which is very interesting. And then later on you have explanations about how to analyze your racing data, your driving data. You have a quite comprehensive way of gathering data and analyzing stuff like gear change, suspension travel, and all that stuff. So that's very interesting. Then you have some kind of frequently asked questions. When something is going wrong, what could be the reason? And then you have some, let's say, basic driving school. You have all the flags and conditions on the track explained. And then you have some kind of driving school, how to approach certain corners, how to go through certain obstacles on the course. So this is really, really interesting to read. And it is a little bit tricky to find certain things inside the manual. So more or less you have to either read through this or you have to use the search function for certain terms. And yeah, that's one point. And I think now it's about time to jump to the game and see how I have configured things inside of it. So Windows gone, okay. Let's hope we get it back. That's a very strange thing. Oh, here it is. Okay, very nice. So as you can see, this is actually just a demo race where I have just deselected my own driver and started the race, and then it is kind of a, well, attraction mode. And that's very interesting because it has some sort of a TV feeling as well. You can flip through the drivers. So we can look at different drivers, we can jump into the cockpit, and we have some different cameras like front or rear view, side views, and all that stuff. And that's very nice as well. And the interesting thing is that when I was using those different camera angles in the original DOSBox with the manual CPU configuration, most of these views weren't working at all. They were really stuttering, they were lagging extremely. But now with this other DOSBox version, ECE, everything is working very fine. And you can go through all of those cameras. There's just a very minor complaint. I would wish to have some variation on the tire textures just to see that they are turning. But well, anyway, that's not so important. And in cockpit view, you're not going to see your tires unless they fell off. Anyway, so let's jump out of this. As you can see, it is completely in German, but I'm going to explain most of the things as best as possible. And one important thing is actually your steering. And as you can see, you have some options, not as much as in modern games nowadays, but here it is really important to set these options to the appropriate relation to your steering wheel. And this may require some trial and error. So there is a mapping inside DOSBox where you can adjust accesses reported to the game or something like this. But the way I have used this is that I left the DOSBox mapping as it is because I don't want to work on so many different options at all. So I want to keep things quite simple. And the easiest thing actually is that you just jump to joystick calibration and then you go through your axis on your joystick, and then you can see which axis is affected by your pedals and your steering and all that stuff. And coming back to the thing with the combined axis, if you are not going to use combined axis, then you have to tell the game that you want to calibrate your steering device in a different way. Otherwise, you will end up having the accelerator and or the throttle and the brake pedals not going to work inside the game, because the game expects some kind of point of the middle, so a centering or something like this. And with not combined pedals, this option isn't working. So this is really important that you check this option, and then you can calibrate each axis by its own. And I highly recommend to do this at the beginning of every game. Every time you start DOSBox again, you have to calibrate this. Otherwise, you will see some drift or something like this. So the car isn't going straight or something like this. So, and here you got some instruction. Please turn to the left side as much as possible. Right side as much as possible. Center the wheel, that's really important. The car is going straight. Then now we have to accelerate. And as we can see, it isn't working. Why? Bitte nicht, do not accelerate. Brake. Not brake. And it says it's done, but I have some doubts about this. So maybe this is because I went into the profiler and then I haven't restarted DOSBox. So that's probably one thing we may have to test, but we'll see. And the other values are more or less standard. So steering assistance off, and how are we going to translate this? This is if the car is going to oversteer, then you have some assistance here. I've set this to off, and this is actually the amount you're actually not sure what this setting is all about. I thought it is related to the steering range of your wheels, but I think this is actually set up in the car setup. But anyway, I left this as it is, so it's actually not really important. And usually I have this set to 0. I'm quite surprised to see this. And I added a small amount of steering reduction with speed. And this is mainly because I think GB2 was not really built having modern steering devices in mind. And the thing is that if you set this to 0, the car becomes a bit nervous on straights. So it's not really going completely straight. It is almost a little bit to the left or to the right. And this makes it a little bit tricky to align the cars, especially if there are other cars around you. So I've set this to 20%, and this has reduced this nervousness on straights a bit. And it's not that much that your steering is completely off if you go through high-speed chicanes or something like this. So otherwise you really have to adapt that your steering wheel is doing different things depending on speed. So this is just a personal taste, and I think with some practice I may go to reduce this even more. And anything else is set to analog, that's important, and all those dead zones are set to 0 usually. And I haven't got my clutch to work. That's something I really have to dig into it. And well, actually it is not so important, because you usually need this just for the start, for example. But I found that in other racing games I have used the clutch a lot to control a car that started to spin off what it was already started. So it has already started to spin, especially in GDR cars, for example. If they tend to break out, then it's always good to go on the clutch and disconnect your engine from the wheels. It is much easier to catch the car then, because everything else is just affecting the speed of your wheels on your driven wheels, and this makes things often quite harder, so to say. So yeah, as I said, calibrating your access and having all those settings right. It's a very important thing. And then the next thing is actually options. So the most important thing, at least back in the days, was the graphic options. And here you can set this to automatic, or I just set this to manual, SVGA mode, all track details and all details in mirrors and all around me. And as you can see, the max frame rate is sort of maxed out here, so there is no chance to set this even higher. And if we click on proposal, then everything remains the same. So my PC is actually able to run the game with all those fantastic details. And well, the next things are just kind of personal taste. You can set the volume of the music, volume of the engine. So then you have all those tire noise, for example, and all the noise just around you. So what I found is that the engine is a bit loud. I mean, in Formula 1 engines are loud, but in normal race conditions you have a helmet, which I usually do not use indoors. So I may reduce this a little bit. Yeah, and that's actually all we have to do here. You can go and set up your own team, your own driver. So I went for the team Simtech, which was actually a team back in 1996. And I set myself to Daniel Delay because I'm a bit delayed learning games like this and learning tracks. And so I thought it sounds nice. Let's go for this. And you can save this, you can load this, you can create different seasons and all that things. So there are many of options here. And then actually we got the drive menu, and here I got quick race, test race, race without points, so to say. Then you got your championship, and then you got additional driving options, so you can set up where your quick race is going to be, what's going to be your start position. Got additional race options, training length, qualifying length, race length, pit stop strategy, and then you got some options. If you go to play this in multiplayer, you can link two PCs together and play this in multiplayer mode. Then you have the strength of your opponents, and I've set this to semi-profile, because if you start with rookie or amateur, then I made the experience that the opponents tend to break a little bit strange, and it's really hard if you're chasing someone and this guy is breaking unexpectedly. You kind of, most of the time, you just crash into it. So this behavior becomes more and more realistic if you set this to higher difficulties. Otherwise, you may face those issues. Unfortunately, I'm actually not able to follow professionals or the aces, so to say. So I've set this to the middle. And what I have to say about GP2 is that the AI, if we are able to call it like this, is really fair. So it makes a lot of fun to drive in the field, surrounded by cars, compared to other simulations like IndyCar Racing 2, for example. It was really unforgiving, and here it is really nice. And here you could just set up your the performance distribution over the teams, and this is set to 1994. So the game is using actually a little bit older data for the teams and the cars. And then I'm not going to dive into all of those menus, but here you have the chance to set up your car and to save those. Then you have special options, and you can even increase this. Oops. option menu to more details, and then you can really fine-tune everything you want on this car. And here you got some settings about what can be damaged, what can be broken on the car, what can fail. So I've set this to all because I want to have this as well as realistic as possible. And it is working quite okayish, so you do not have frequent engine blow-ups or something like this. And even if you dodge into someone briefly or tenderly, whatever we want to call this, then the car isn't breaking up completely. So this is actually working quite okay. And then you can get some data from your hot labs, and then you can actually dive into this. And then you can, I selected this, yeah. Then you can analyze your data over the track, and it's actually in feet. That's funny. The whole game is in metric, but distance is actually in feet. That's weird. And yep, so you can see how much of your steering wheel range you have used. You can see how much you have accelerated, or you can even check your gear settings, all that things. So you really can fine tune your whole game to what you think it is important to you. So as I said, I'm not going to dive into this too extensively. Just have to find a way to get out of this. Yeah, okay. And yeah, that's basically how I have set up that whole thing and how it is basically supposed to work. So let's see whether my joystick settings are still working. I was a little bit confused that I couldn't calibrate the B-axis. So no, it isn't working. So that's probably really an issue because I have changed some settings and haven't restarted DOSBox. So let's see, save configuration. If we're going to restart this, then the issue is fixed. And we got a chance to see this nice intro, hopefully. No. That's really strange. The OBS is really kind of fooling me. Game capture. Come on. Show me my game. It is trying to do something, but actually it's not doing something. That's weird. That's really weird. I have some flashing screen. Now it stopped flashing. Ah, now we see something. So I guess PC games are, well, they tend to change the resolution depending on video playback, title screens, menus, all that things. And It looks a little bit to me that OBS is having a hard time capturing the window then. So, well, let's check whether my joystick's working again. Yep, here we go. Okay, that's all. And now we can see if we get around the track. Oh, I do not have audio. Now we got audio? Yep. So if everything got right and if you got used to it after a while, then driving feels really fantastic. I mean, it is a Formula One car, it is a simulation, so it is actually a little bit tricky to stay on track, especially if you don't know the tracks anymore. That was one issue I was facing. And but after a while, you really get used to it. And one thing that's quite important in this game is that this car is very sensitive if you hit the curbs. I remember that there was one season where they started to change the layout of tracks and they added some higher curbs than usual. And a lot of drivers were complaining about this. And I think there was an official protest by the Driver Association, I think it was called like this, to the FIA. And then a year later or something like this, they changed this back. But I'm not sure whether that was around 1995, 6, 7, whatsoever. But in this game, it is really very sensitive. If you go and hit the curbs, then your car will likely spin off. You can touch them briefly. That's actually going to work fine. But I think you may have to adjust your damper settings and your spring settings to be more forgiving if you tend to hit the curbs quite frequently. But well, I started just to get used to kind of avoid them as best as possible, and therefore this problem is almost eliminated. I got the volume pretty low, I can't hear my car, so it's actually a little bit tricky to drive. So it's more or less some sort of muscle memory to go around the track here. And the interesting thing is that if you do a practice session, then there are no visitors, so those ranks are empty. But if you go to race mode, then they will be back, and you've got a lot of funny looking colored points everywhere, and these are supposed to be your spectators, so to say. So actually this is running quite fine, so controls are really how I want to have them, and yep, the game just runs perfectly in my opinion. That's really a very nice thing. And yeah, that's all I have to say for this video. It's already long enough again. I'm sorry for this one, and I'm sorry for being a little bit off topic, but this is really some sort of early adult, very late childhood memory thing to me that I am able to run this game with all those options, settings, and especially with this kind of amazing hardware. And yeah, that's all I have for this episode. So feel free to use the comment section. I'm really looking forward what you think about this game, what you think about retro gaming at all. And if you have any questions, something like this, feel free to express yourself. And as usually, I'm highly thankful for all my supporters on Patreon and here on YouTube and channel membership. And if you haven't done so, feel free to subscribe to the channel so that you're not going to miss anything in the future. And you can follow me on Twitter. This is actually the place where I'm a bit more active than here on YouTube. And there you can catch some of my things I'm actually working on. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.